Brendan Allen and Brian Richmond. Who were those two men?
Brendan Allen and Brian Richmond were two of my best friends in my childhood and my teenage years. We grew up skiing together in Squaw Valley, California. I was on the Squaw Valley ski team for many years. And the ski team was a dozen or 16 of us, something like that. And we had really been together our entire lives, our childhood, our adolescence, our teenage years. We skied 6 days a week, 10 months a year. We skied all over the world with each other, traveling around as competitive ski racers. And, of the dozen or so of us on the ski team, I had three really close friends, two of whom were Brendan and Brian. And on February 21st of 2001, Brendan, Brian, and myself were skiing together at Squaw Valley. There was a ton of new snow. The mountain had just been blasted by a huge storm that came in. And the layering of the snow was really important that day because the week before, there was a storm that came in that was very cold. And when there's cold snow, the snow is really light and fluffy and airy. And then a few days later, a storm came in that was very warm, and it dumped like several feet of heavy, wet, like cement snow on top of that. And that layering made it so that the snow was very fragile on the hill. It's very prone and susceptible to sliding, to avalanches. So the three of us were skiing that morning. We skied out of bounds, which is illegal. You're not supposed to do it for various reasons. There's no chairlift at the bottom. You have to hike your way out or hitchhike back. This is what we did. And it's also very dangerous. And the three of us skiing that morning triggered a small avalanche. And it was the first time we were 17 years old at the time. It was the first time I think any of us had really felt and experienced an avalanche in all of our skiing day. Skiing thousands of times before that, I don't think we'd ever really experienced an avalanche. But it's pretty small. I think it was maybe up to our knees, something like that. And it was over in a few seconds. It was kind of like a little joyride. Like it's all of a sudden you just realize like we were just getting bucked around by this avalanche. And it was very clear. There was no doubt about it. We were in an avalanche. We got to the bottom and it was like, oh shit, did you see that avalanche? It was so cool. And we didn't really see anything else about it. And then Brendan and Brian wanted to do that run again. So we get to the bottom. We have to hitchhike back to the mountain. There's no chairlift at the bottom when you ski out of bounds. So they wanted to do it again. And I didn't want to. And so I said, hey guys, I have an idea. Rather than hitchhiking back, why don't the two of you go do it? And I will drive my truck around to the mountain and pick you up. And they said, great, awesome. Let's do that. We went our separate ways. They skied off and I went back to our locker room to get in my truck and go pick them up on the other side of the mountain. 20 or 30 minutes later, I go to pick them up and they're not there. And I didn't think anything about it at the time. I think what I remember recalling is that I was probably a little bit late to picking them up. And my thought was they got tired of waiting for me and they just left. They hitchhiked back themselves. So my first feeling was like guilt, like, oh God, my friends got mad at me and just left. And then so I went back to our locker room where I thought I would find them and they weren't there. And nobody else had seen them. And the day went on, hours went on. Later that day, later in the evening, I think it would say, it was around 4 p.m., Brian's mom called me and she said, Morgan, Brian didn't show up for work today. Do you know where he is? And I told her what happened. I said, we were skiing out of bounds and I was going to pick them up, but they never showed up. And then we started putting the dots together of what happened. And we're still, at every hour that ticks by, you think, okay, we're going to find them. They're going to show up. But every hour that ticks by is another holy shit moment of where are they? We finally got the police involved. The police finally got search and rescue involved. And I'll fast forward to the next morning. This is roughly 24 hours later. Search and rescue teams and a pack of search dogs found Brendan and Brian buried under an avalanche. They were dead. They were hit by a massive, massive avalanche that buried them. They were about 6 feet buried in snow at the time. And so we were 17 years old at the time. And that was, and I'll first stop here and say, I think everybody, you and every one of the people has lost somebody close to them. I don't want to pretend like my story is unique. Like this is like everybody has their own unique story, but this was mine of losing two people who are very dear to me, but also having what is effectively a near-death experience myself I made this decision of like, oh, we did this run before and I had fun, but I don't want to do it again. Why don't you go do it? Which 99.9% chance that decision saved my life. It was the most important decision I ever made in my entire life. And I thought nothing of it at the time. That too, I think everybody, including you, Danny, have probably something like that. And so that was a really formative experience that just really taught me a lot about risk and a lot about the fragility of life, how everything can just be snatched away in 2 seconds, how unfair life can be. teaching you about risk and tail consequences of the risks that you take. That kind of really stuck with me for a while.
That was that article that you wrote, Three Sides of Risk, which I'll link below if people want to read that story and really feel the writing of it, was one of the few that I've ever printed out and wrote on top of it, "This is for my child, my future child." Right? So it's like, it hit me at such a deep level, like just the small decisions we make have such a large impact, and sometimes we don't even know what those decisions are. When did you feel comfortable to share that publicly? Like, why share publicly when that could have been a story that you could have kept to yourself for forever?
Great story. No one's ever asked me that too. That's a great question, I should say. So I think as a lot of people will probably relate to, in the weeks, months, maybe even years after that, I had a sense of not denial. I wasn't in denial, but it was like, compartmentalize the pain and don't talk to anybody about it. That was really what, I don't think I talked to anybody about it. Maybe my parents a little bit, but it really just kind of that's too sad to think about. So let's just move on with my life. And also that began the years of my life in which I started college, got my first girlfriend. Like, there's a lot of other things going on in my life that were keeping my thoughts occupied. So I didn't really think about it that much. And, I think, when I wrote that article a couple of years ago, my wife said, and she and I had been together for 15 years at that point. And she said, "Yeah, I remember when we first met. It was like one of the first stories you told me." So there was a period in which I was talking about it and, telling people who were close to me, "Oh, let me tell you the story about this time that impacted my life." But then it was 2 or 3 years ago that I told a friend that story, and not the long version that I just gave you, the somewhat long version. I told her like the 10-second version. And she said, "You've got to write that." And I said, "Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's good. Maybe in my next article, I'll tell the 1-paragraph version of that story as kind of like a lead in to a different article." And that was my intention. And I started writing it with that as the intention. I'm going to write the 1-paragraph version of that story. And it all just kind of came spilling out. So the article that was published, I think, was 3,000 words, which is pretty long for a blog post. It's a long, meaty one. And I think I honestly wrote it in one sitting in like 90 minutes. It just kind of like fell out. And maybe this is wrong. I'm not a psychotherapist, but maybe it was like I had been burying it all in my brain for years. And when I finally opened the door, it just like rushed right out. That was kind of what it felt like, at least.